Dixon.
You got stuff for on?
Thank you. Okay, we'll get started with our West Haven City Council meeting. Today is March 18th, 2026, and it is 6:02 p.m. My name is Rob Vanderwood. I'm the mayor of West Haven and will be running this meeting tonight. We appreciate those that are here in attendance. We have a couple of our council members that are traveling for work and some will be on Zoom tonight, and we'll get those. Looks like both of them are on, so that's perfect. So we have everybody at least engaged and present tonight. We appreciate our sheriff's office being here tonight as well. Thank you, Lieutenant, and our staff also for being here. We'll get started with our opening ceremonies. We'll start with our Pledge of Allegiance by Councilmember Dixon, and we'll move to our prayer or moment of silence with Councilmember Call.
Would you please stand and repeat the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we are grateful to gather together this evening. We are grateful for this beautiful city that we live in, for our residents here, and for our city staff that put in time and effort to help this be a great place for all. We pray that we may have your spirit tonight as we discuss these issues within the city, and we ask for these favors and blessings in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Councilmember Dixon and Councilmember Call. We appreciate that. All right, we'll move on to item 3, our public presentation. Residents attending this meeting will be allotted 3 minutes to express a concern or ask a question about any issue that is not on the agenda. No action can or will be taken on any issues that are presented. Do we have anyone that would like to come forward at this time? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our item 4, our upcoming events. We have our first event is our music circle. This will be at the community barn over in Green Farms on March 23rd at 7 p.m. We have our senior lunch bunch that will also be at the community barn as well on March 25th, and that's at 11:30 a.m. Great fun involved with that as well. We have our Easter egg hunt. Special note that it's a little bit earlier this year, and that will be on March 28th, and it will be at 10 o'clock at the Kenneth Baldwin Park. We also have our oil pastel workshop, again at the barn. And that will be on April 13th at 6 p.m. Is that filling up?
There's still some spots.
Good.
Yes.
Excellent. Got a few spots left on that, so jump on that. We have our Utah League of Cities and Towns, our mid-year conference that is held in St. George that most cities of Utah attend. We will be attending, several council members and myself will be attending that on April 22nd and 24th. Just for special note, we also have our great event, Touch a Truck, which is will be at the Sports Park on May 4th of 2026, which is coming up very quick. That's from 6 to 8 p.m. And then lastly, we have our Ogden Pioneer Days Parade, just to keep you informed that'll be on July 24th at 8 a.m. So looking forward to those fun events in the area. Any other upcoming events that I may have missed? Okay, we'll move on to item number 5, our council updates. Does the council have anything to report on for the public?
I don't have anything, but I just want to acknowledge that we have a couple of young people out here in the audience tonight, and like to welcome my neighbor Zach Steger. I think it's cool to see younger folks involved and coming to the meeting. So thanks for coming. Welcome.
Appreciate it. Excellent. Anything else? Okay, we'll move on to item 6 on here, action on our consent agenda. We have our council meeting minutes that were held on March 4th. of 2026. And that's all we have on our consent agenda. So I'm ready for a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the consent agenda for the council meeting minutes for the meeting held on March 4th, 2026.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, and a second. Any further discussion on our consent agenda? Now we'll do a roll call on that. Councilmember Dixon,
Aye.
Councilmember Call,
Aye.
Councilmember Saunders,
Aye.
Councilmember Morse,
Aye.
and Councilmember Schwab.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries on that. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to our next item, item 7, action on resolution 10-2026, declaring certain generators as surplus to the city's needs, authorizing the disposal of such a surplus property. And I don't see Mr. Tanner here.
Yeah.
Would you like to take that, Mr.?
Good, yes. So the city has some existing generators. They were stored in we have a facility, as you know, a storage, essentially a storage unit that's on the school property that we have emergency supplies cached there. And these were generators that were located in that shed that has since been replaced. And we found that the generators are becoming a little unreliable and hard to maintain. And we did repair them to the point that they are serviceable or can use a purpose for someone, but we're not sure that it's the best equipment to provide service for us in an emergency situation. For those reasons, we're suggesting that they're surplused and we replace them with some updated generators that can be a little bit more reliable.
Okay, excellent. I think, did everybody read that report? That seems like they're trying to find some that are a little bit quieter as well. And plus, we do have, if we have a special need, we have a great big generator we can use as well for that. But I think it's a good idea. Any other questions on this item for surplus? Anybody online? Any concerns or questions? Okay, we'll go ahead. I'm ready for a motion.
I'll
on this
move to
particular-
approve action on resolution 10-2026, declaring certain generators as surplus to the city's needs, authorizing the disposal of such as surplus property.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion in 2 seconds, and we appreciate that. Any further discussion on this resolution? Okay, we'll do a roll call on this one. Councilmember Dixon,
Aye.
Councilmember Saunders,
Aye.
Councilmember Morse,
Aye.
Councilmember Schwab,
Aye.
Councilmember Call.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries on that. We'll get those listed and get those out of here. Perfect. All right, next on our agenda is the exciting part. We're very glad to have committee members, and that's one of the most important things I think that we can do is share some time and effort and have the community involved. On item 8 on here, we have advice and consent of 4 of our Parks and Trails Committee member appointments submitted by myself, Mayor Vanderwood, to fill our 4 3-year terms. These terms will be from March 18th of 2026 today through December 31st of 2028. The names that we have submitted, and if you're in the audience, and we appreciate you being here, if you don't mind standing when I read your name off, if you're here, we had Brent Coy, John Monroe, Laura Castro, and LaDonna McCain. And we got 2 of them here. Thank you for being here. It's good to see your faces and get to meet you. And thank you for applying for that. Is there any questions from the council on these recommendations? Okay, if not, I'm ready for a motion.
I'll make a motion to give advice and consent for 4 Parks and Trails Committee members to fill 4 3-year terms from March 18th, 2026 through December 31st, 2028 for Brent Coy, John Monroe, Laura Castro, and LaDonna McCain.
Second.
Perfect. We'll give that to Councilmember Dixon. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this one? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, You're in. Thank you very much. And we appreciate your service towards that. We're glad the trails are going to have a lot to do. And we appreciate Councilmember Schwab is the liaison for the Parks and Trails. So we appreciate his work on that as well. Next on here is our item 9 for advice and consent of 1 community events committee member appointment. This is submitted by myself, Mayor Vanderwood, to fill 1 3-year term. The term will be from March 18th of 2026 through December 31st of 2028. And the name submitted for that is Mari Roberts. And is Mari here? Doesn't look like she's here tonight. I did talk to her on the phone. Great lady. We're so excited to have her on that. She's had lots of experience with events. And so unless there's any concerns or issues, I'm ready for a motion.
I'll move to approve advice and consent of 1 community events committee member appointment submitted by Mayor Vanderwood to fill 1 3-year term. The term will be from March 18th, 2026 through December 31st, 2028. And the name is Mari Roberts.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries for that. Excellent. Item 10 on here on the agenda, advice and consent of 3 of Arts Council Committee member appointments submitted by myself, Mayor Vanderwood, to fill 3 2-year terms. The terms will be from March 18th of 2026 through December 31st of 2027. And the names that we have on here, and if you're here, please stand. We have Reggie Peterson, who is out of town, I know for sure. And we have Mary Jo Stringham. Thank you, Mary Jo. And we have Nathan West. Nathan, I'm not sure, didn't make it. So anyway, thank you for being here. And it's good to have you guys involved with the Arts Council. It's a great committee to be on. So overall, we have that. And any further discussion from the council on this one? If not, I'm ready for a motion.
I would make a motion that we provide advice and consent on 3 Art Council Committee members to fill 3 2-year terms from March 18, 2026 through December 31st, 2027 for Reggie Peterson, Mary Jo Stringham, and Nathan West.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and only 1 second this time. That's great. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries on that. Thank you again for being here. We appreciate that and your service towards the city. We're looking forward to having you on these committees. We'll move on to item 11, action on resolution 11-2026, termination of an interlocal agreement between Roy City and West Haven City regarding financial contributions to support the Roy Senior Center. I think with some of the changes that we're having on that, we're also, any of the seniors can attend any of these senior centers they would like to. They're throughout the county, but we wanted to just work on that. So did you want to have a discussion on that a little bit?
Yes, if I could, Mr. Mayor and Council, I did put together a staff report on the issue. As you know, one of the projects that you've tasked me to do is to do a contract review of not only this, but all of our current contracts and interlocal agreements, and that's being done systematically. Since this one's on the agenda, I went ahead and provided some thoughts and narrative, essentially a contract review, and essentially some of the findings of that review, at least in my opinion, is that essentially senior services is an essential service that the city provides. The city does provide some senior programming, and as you know, that's the lunch bunch, which we talked about today. It's a monthly lunch where the city hosts and invites seniors in our community to come and gather and to have a meal, and the mayor's done a great job along with council members of facilitating that opportunity and program. Very complimentary is programming that's provided at senior centers. That's done more or less on a daily basis. And we have 2 and possibly 3 senior centers that are in close proximity to us, the Roy Hillside, the Riverdale, and the Ogden. We recently, in the past year, I don't think it's been even a year yet, we entered into the Roy Hillside Senior Center interlocal agreement, and I think within the last 30 to 45 days, we entered into one with Riverdale. I would say that I do believe and anticipate that those who attend those programs could be the same that attend our Lunch Bunch program, but they could also be they could be a separate group. And I think that's important to know. The numbers that Roy is providing us is saying that there's 57 participants on some level that have participated in their programs, which represents 7% of the patrons that participate with them. That's grown 1% from last year, and you can see there's a 5-year history that represents some participation by West Haven City residents. For that reason, I do feel it's appropriate to continue on with the interlocal agreement. If you look at assessing the value and feedback from those who are participating in the program, the closest metrics that I could find was using Google reviews, and both Roy Hillside and Riverdale have a 4.8 star rating with 43 Google reviews and 50 reviews. And so I feel like that gives some indication that there's a good service being provided. Overall, the amount that we entered into Roy is for $4,000 annually. There are some increases built in relative to CPI, but relatively it's a small amount. I would say that I do think senior programming is essential, and the reason why I think that is because as individuals age and seniors age, even 10 years potentially can make a big difference in someone's quality of life, their emotional and social needs, and the availability of social interaction. And so I do feel like it is a value added program, and I do feel like it's fair that the city participates on some level in supporting those existing senior centers. It doesn't make sense for every city to have its own senior center because I feel like there's capacity within the existing senior centers to fill the needs of our community. And so anyways, for those reasons, all those reasons, in my review and my opinion, that I feel like we should continue on for several more years, continue to promote, see if we could increase participation and continue to evaluate the services provided.
All right, thank you for that review. Council, thoughts, question?
Can you tell us how much the Riverdale local agreement was, Sean?
It's 2,500. It's a little different approach to Riverdale, and there is a difference in the funding structure and the approach. So the Roy Senior Center is connected with Weber Human Services, and they do receive federal funding. Because they receive federal funding, it is a little different, some different restrictions that come with that funding, where essentially they cannot discriminate against people by address or where they live. So essentially, if you take the federal funding, then you've got to allow participation from whoever shows up and wants to participate or request services. The Riverdale Senior Center, as I understand it, does not receive federal funding, so they're not under the same obligations and restrictions. And so in that case, the city participates with Riverdale by essentially helping to purchase a membership, which is again different than the structure of the Roy Senior Center because of the funding.
And this will just come out, we have it in the budget, this extra 4,000.
So we did pay for this year, and it would have to budget for next year. I did want to note that I did talk to Matt Peterson about this discussion item and the possibility of terminating, and asked him relative to the funding, if we would essentially by virtue of our existing interlocal agreement, if we would need to pay for next year. He said his first impression is that he did not think that Roy would invoice us for next year if we gave notice at this point. So it was a very gracious interaction. And so I included that for your information.
I know that my twin aunts, before they died, attended Roy a lot and they really liked it. So I can see where it would be beneficial to seniors that they don't have to change to another place. I know they could still go, but I am fine with trying supporting them. It looks like they have a lot of activities every day that are available.
Do we have a comparison on like how many of our citizens attend Riverdale versus Roy? Like, I know I've seen that on Riverdale in the past when we were looking at Riverdale, but I don't remember, how the two compare as far as participation from our citizens.
Well, I think we can get those numbers, especially as time goes on. I'm not sure I know, or even Riverdale, and maybe the mayor knows, because the mayor's talked to Riverdale specifically in helping us to arrange that agreement. But I think as time goes on, we'll be able to essentially get that data from Riverdale.
Okay.
I think
I just wondered if we had more participation in one or versus the other, or if it was kind of similar in numbers, just kind of looking at.
it's a little bit skewed because we went ahead and moved last year. It hasn't quite been a year. It was in June when that was taken care of, but that's when we announced and seniors could that we had an agreement with Roy to move forward. So we've had a little bit more time with that. We've seen from our seniors that attend our lunch bunch have started to transfer a little bit more from the Roy facility to the Riverdale. Mainly the reason that they've indicated is it's mainly the meal in general. So Riverdale cooks all their meals. It's kind of like school lunch. The lunch ladies used to cook food. Now they don't. They kind of unpackage things and give to the kids a lot of packaged food. But Riverdale still cooks and makes meals, and they really like that. So right now we really don't have good numbers for that. And, to Sean's point, it's great to have both available and to participate. We're just paying a lot more for Roy, but we're seeing a decline, I think, in some of the numbers. And when we say 57, that's a yearly number. Would you correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a yearly number, and it's not always perfectly accurate, but it's what Weber Human Services provides, right? Yeah, so that's what they've kind of come up with. And the difficult part with the whole thing is that Riverdale unfortunately got left out of the mix when it came to receiving some funds. And so North Ogden got it, and Roy and a couple others up in South Ogden and a couple other places ended up getting the funds. So it was kind of unfortunate, but people have really enjoyed going to Riverdale. I think Roy provides a good service as well, but I think we're just seeing a little bit of a shift. So maybe next year we'll have better numbers on it.
So I think the numbers are for the lunches, right? Do we have an idea of how many attend any of the classes, or are they just counting how many eat?
I think they're kind of doing both. Yeah, a little bit of both. But like, for example, with Riverdale, you're seeing the monies that we pay to help that is for them to help keep lights on there, provide some services, and some of the classes that they provide. They pay for their own lunches. So I think they pay $4 at Riverdale. And I don't recall what it is in Roy. I can't remember for sure, but it's $4. It's a little bit cheaper. But and the meal, they said, is a little bit better. But I think the activities are very comparable. But we're just seeing a little bit more of a shift. So that's a decision we need to make tonight is whether it's a possible termination of Roy for the 4,000 per year versus the 2,500 for Riverdale, or do we want to support both is what the question would be to the council. Anybody have questions online?
Not a question, but I'll just share my opinion. I feel that we should be helping out both cities with this. Initially, when we found out about Roy, we weren't informing our residents that that was a place they could go. Same with Riverdale. I mean, that's just kind of where they naturally migrated to for these services, and we don't currently have those here in-house. And so to stop funding to one and encourage them to go somewhere else, that might have a few people go. But I think if we turn off Roy and residents still decide to show up there, I mean, then we're kind of imposing on them, and I don't want to tell residents they can't attend either one. So at this point, I would be in support of continuing both cities for now.
Okay, thank you. Just as a reminder, though, they can attend any of them. They can attend North Ogden or any of them at this point. So, any other comments? If you'd like to come forward, you're welcome to. You'd have to come up to the mic up here, please. We signed an agreement with Roy, just so you know. We signed an agreement with them. We shared that with Hooper, with West Haven, and Roy because their expenses above and beyond was around $12,000. Was that correct? Mm-hmm. About $12,000, and the mayor of Roy at the time requested that we share in that cost, and so that's how we divided it. Was 4, 4, and 4 to get to the 12. And I went to Hooper Elementary, and I think that's right.
That's right.
Perfect. So, anyway, I'm ready for a motion, whichever direction you'd like to go.
I think I'm leaning towards supporting it for now and just seeing how the two go. So I don't know. Do we need to do anything if we stay with it? We're not going to terminate it, then.
Yeah, I think you could make a motion, and it probably would be well since it's on, and I guess the motion would be to continue on, and with the existing arrangement. But I would defer to our legal counsel if she has.
Motion would be to deny this resolution.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
there
what
we
I
go.
would recommend.
Hey.
Deny action on resolution 11-2026.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to deny action on resolution 11-2026, termination of the interlocal agreement between Roy City and the West Haven City regarding financial contributions to support the Roy Senior Center.
I will second it, but I get nervous at seconding, so I second.
Way to pause. For
Yes,
silence.
I did make a pause.
Okay. Well, thank you. We have a motion. We have a motion and a second. Thank you for that. Any further discussion on this?
I just feel like if we're going to support both, even if we were just supporting one, we need to make a greater effort to advertise both of these because we have yet to do so. So maybe that's something that Michelle can make sure we find the schedules for these other centers, and that we're regularly posting those, or note in the newsletter that we're spending money here, but I don't think most know that we are. So we need to put that out to the public.
That's good
I
recommendation.
think we just want to make sure it's in the newsletter, right? And so we want to make sure people
On the website
can
too.
read it. And the
Yeah,
website.
social media, whatever's happening, we can
Yeah,
put it
yeah.
out there.
Great idea. Okay, so let's do a roll call on this one. Councilmember Saunders,
Aye.
Councilmember Dixon,
Aye.
Councilmember Morse,
Aye.
Councilmember Schwab,
Aye.
and Councilmember Call.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. All right, we'll move on to our next item on here, item 12. This is to review and discussion possible action related topics associated with the fiscal year of the 2027 budget, which include, but are not limited to, the general fund, capital projects fund, cemetery fund, stormwater fund, the revenue sources, city services, and increases to the law enforcement contract, etc. So this is a very wide open area on here. I'm going to turn the time over to our city manager, Mr. Sean Warnke.
Okay. Great. I'm just trying to pull this up into presentation mode. Okay. Well, thanks, Mayor and Council. And yeah, it's good to see residents here as we start talking about the budget. I wanted to talk about these individual funds. We may not get to every fund in here tonight, but and frankly, we'll focus on the general fund. But in subsequent conversations, I want to talk about each fund. As you know, the general fund provides general governmental services. So, for example, the senior services, which we were talking about, would be paid for from the general fund. The general fund primarily is supported through sales tax, and we'll be talking about revenue sources. We are anticipating some new and ongoing expenses. As you know, at the last meeting, the city council had a presentation from the sheriff's office, who we contract for law enforcement services, and there was discussion about adding 10 new additional officers. And the reasons for that, or I should say deputies in their case, and the reason for that request and what the fiscal impacts were associated with that. So primarily, let me move to the next slide and we'll talk about some of the anticipated budget items for 2027. And these are isolated more to increases that would be anticipated in 2027 and beyond. So these would be ongoing expenses. So as it relates to the new deputies that we talked about, that's $707,000. And we'll talk briefly about how that's allocated with all the contract cities. But as you know, it's a pooled service that the sheriff office provides to multiple cities throughout Weber County, and those participating in that law enforcement contract. The funding formula is split based upon, I think it's 40% population, 60% calls for service. And we're going to talk about that formula and some of the impacts that we anticipate potentially on our population adjustments, and also on potential calls for service and adjustments there. There was an added crossing guard that we implemented at the crossing of 4,000 and 4,700 West. So that's 4,000 South, 4,700 West. That is a intersection that has a lot of traffic volume, and some of the turning movements there that occur through the crosswalk. We felt like the safety of the crossing guards and the school children required having 2 crossing guards there. And so that's an ongoing expense of $7,300. We've long talked about emergency management and the need to make progress with emergency management. We do have an existing employee that's been filling in the gaps for that emergency management position, but I do feel like having a regular scheduled employee with regular scheduled duties that have active deadlines associated with the nature of their duties. For example, as everyone knows, it's code enforcement, and so as a complaint comes in, you know, that there's an active understanding and expectation that work needs to be done to resolve that complaint. With emergency management, it's a little different. It's more of a passive deadlines, and because of that, I think the nature of and the work volume always puts emergency management aside, and I just feel like we really need to have someone whose sole purpose is emergency management, if that is indeed the intent. of the city to be in a position where we're better prepared and we're making more active progress.
Is that a part-time position?
It would be a part-time position.
20 hours a week or however you,
Yes, I think that's what and this was just a rough budget number, but yes, I would, it's essentially 20 hours a week. So I say that because I haven't scored it relative to our job valuation and finalized all the job duties. But for budgeting purposes, I felt like 30,000 would put us in a position to engage a emergency manager. As you know, we've talked about parks and cemetery and just the overall growth for parks. I actually have a slide that I can certainly show you that does our best estimate to show the added acreage that's occurred recently, and it's significant, as you all know and could anticipate, with park acreage and the ongoing responsibility to maintain. So as an employer, the city has health insurance. That's 30,000 is what our renewal came in at. I think it was 4.5%, which is half of what trend is. Most of I think others within our insurance pool were getting closer to that 8% renewal. One of the things that we think and we feel is, again, important in the operation of the barn is trying to streamline how people rent that space and how we manage it. Again, I do have a slide if you're interested that shows what I see as a perceived, it's not a perceived, there has been an increase in calls that City Hall's experienced, and it correlates roughly to the time when we really started marketing and seeing a lot of rentals occur within the barn. I think it was essentially 1,000 more calls per month tied to it. And I can, again, show you that slide. But what we're hoping to do is to move, or at least what I would like to do is find solutions that allow residents the ability to schedule online. I think as I looked at some of the Google reviews, one of the complaints that I saw is people would call in, see availability, and then, talk to others. And then when they called back, it was already rented. And so they lost the space. And there was some frustration, shared on those Google reviews that event occurred, that they weren't able to secure their schedule, even though city staff does inform everyone as they call that it's not scheduled till we receive the deposit, and that's how you secure your event. There's a thought about.
can I ask a
Yeah.
question?
Mhm.
Sorry, Sean, if they approve it and then they find out that they're not going to use it, can they get a refund?
They can. We several iterations ago in the fee schedule, we did put a deposit, so we would refund most of it. We retained some of it, but the majority of it is refunded.
Okay.
And that was primarily to try to prevent people from just.
Yeah, going
Yeah.
out and
Yeah.
scheduling.
So there's some thought about an employee retiring and then potentially rehiring that employee to mow lawns at a much reduced rate and much reduced hours. We feel like, again, with some of the park acreage that have been the park acreage that we've seen increase, and we still anticipate increasing in the near future. Windsor Park, hopefully, will be in a position that it's fully developed or developed to a point where we're seeing maintenance there. So I do feel like there's some ongoing need to be shoring up our park staff. There's some of our contracts are essentially coming due, or essentially the way some of the contracts are worded is that they renew, but the initial term's over. Some of those contracts have come and asked it adjustments in light of some of the economic conditions and the length of the contract. And so I do think that it's reasonable to expect that there are some adjustments made over time. And frankly, maybe in future contracts, we contemplate what those look like and build those into the contract. There's some need for some administrative staff support, and there's some other staffing that we're going to be talking about too. But in some ways we've talked, the question was posed in the strategic plan. One of the questions, this wasn't solely the question, but it was relative to having some additional support administratively. And I do think there's a need for that. I'm still thinking on what that most looks like, or what is the best fit for the city, our needs, our evolution, and kind of where we're at. There are cities of our size that have assistant city managers, and so that's not out of the question. But maybe there's a less expensive approach to getting some of the support that's needed without having to commit to that ongoing expense. An assistant city manager, could be a fairly significant investment when you look at the total compensation relative to the retirement, to the wages, and to the retirement. So it's something that we should be careful about and make sure that there's value added. And I think there could be, but we'll explore that as we move forward. So there's also, I anticipate about $150,000 associated with employee wages. According to the U.S. Bureau of Census, not statistics, it's the labor statistics consumer price index that we use in our Intermountain region, which includes, I believe, Arizona, Idaho, Montana, just essentially what you would anticipate in Nevada. They're seeing a 2.5% increase in the cost of living. And the way that our pay structure is set up is there's I should say 3% merit, and that's just averaged. So I came up with the 150 based upon those two percentage increases. So in total, if that's all true, there's about $1 million of ongoing expenses. In 2028, I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about this, but there's potentially on the horizon, I think, another $123,000 that conceivably could be associated with changes in the law enforcement contract based upon the funding formula. And it's just a look forward into the future. It's not a perfect understanding of what those expenses could be because there's some assumptions, but we can talk about that. There's been some discussion about having an additional public works employee, and the public works employee would essentially create two crews that could be divided, and they could work independently and do work that frankly is lacking, and things that we currently don't do that I think are important to do. I mentioned the assistant city manager. If that is something that the city wanted to move forward and invest in, it's about $190,000, and these are just budget numbers. Again, just based on my perceived thought of what I would anticipate the salary, and based upon that, sort of the known cost of benefits. An office manager has also been discussed at the Public Works and Parks employee. We're starting to see volume of people who frequent that facility, which doesn't necessarily have a dedicated person in the front to greet them and to provide service. So, any questions on some of these thoughts? Obviously, all of this is within your purview as far as ultimately what to include in the budget and what not to. So, if there are things that you're seeing that you want to discuss, or that you want more information, or frankly feel like shouldn't be considered, certainly now's a good time. But as we move through the budgeting process, they could be discussed at a later date too. So,
Hey, thank
Okay.
you for that review. Appreciate that. Council, do you have any questions?
Just on the public works, you mentioned there was maybe some things lacking.
Yeah.
can you give us an example of what that looks like? What are things that you feel like we need to be doing there in the city that we aren't?
Well, yeah, those are good questions. One of the things that frankly I think we need to do, and this kind of ties into the office manager as well, is I think we need to be documenting the work that we are doing for purposes of liability and just ongoing understanding of what needs to be maintained. And so what I mean by that is, if they are doing some kind of maintenance, and certainly if there's on the stormwater, for example, let's say the stormwater, if they're maintaining an aspect of the stormwater to document what that maintenance has been done and the time that they did and the intervals. And then if there's a claim relative to flooding, we can show that we have essentially, maintained that. I think some of the things that they feel like we are lacking on is looking at our traffic control devices. And what I mean by that is our stop signs, our regulatory street signs, our address signs. There's a certain amount of reflectivity that's required for them to be visible and seen. And certainly you probably noticed some signs that need to be replaced that obviously look like they're failed. I think they feel like in some cases, some of those signs are not at the right height. And so that's something that I think they would look to adjust. There was a list of things that the Public Works Director provided, and I could certainly send those on to you. Part of that, and we'll talk about this in a subsequent budget meeting, but part of that is they like to do more maintenance in-house. And so they're looking to get saws, that are more appropriate for cutting asphalt, for cutting concrete. They wanted to get a machine that would grind down the lips of trip hazards so that they're flush. And again, that's something that hasn't been done that we think we need to be doing. Our insurance provider says that right now that there are a lot of cities that that are experiencing a lot of claims relative to tripping hazards on sidewalks. And so again, that's another area that I think they would look to shore up for the city, and just doing those inspections themselves. And again, documenting that those inspections have been done. But those are just a few examples, I think, of how we could bolster our public works. The other thing that I would mention to you is, and we're actually about ready to present that as part of the budget, but we've been looking at different crossings and crosswalks, and potentially painting more crosswalks and improving street lighting in key locations where school children are walking to school. And all of that painting does take time. And again, having two crews to share that would make the work go faster as far as completing the work. So I do have, Mr. Mary, and I want to be conscious of the time and of the council's thoughts about how far we want to go into the conversation on the budget. But I do have the ability to talk to you now, or we could schedule a different time. We could talk a little bit more about the sales tax and the implications there. We talked about what's essentially the general fund and what I anticipate or could foresee for ongoing expenses. Now the thought is, well, how do we pay for those? Sales tax, I wanted to talk to you about that at some point. I wanted to talk to you about capital projects and the transfer of general fund revenue. I wanted to talk to you about potential new sources of revenue, property tax being one, the energy tax being another. And so we could continue the conversation now, but I could certainly, stop at this point, and we could decide how best to continue the conversation. I would say I do feel like I feel as though in the budgeting process I'm a little behind where I would hope to be, and so having conversations and getting direction from you is certainly an important part of the budget and the preparation, especially when there's some discretion involved and some of these things we've talked about tonight. There's some discretion, And certainly how we fund those requires more discretion. And so it would be helpful to get some direction in that regard. So, but I'll pause here and
This is a short meeting. You should keep going.
you guys up for it?
It's not 9 o'clock.
We can definitely allow you 2 more minutes.
Okay.
I think there's a couple things on here that I think as the general public, as we're talking about general fund, I'd like to address. Sean, our city manager, Sean Warnke, and I have talked quite a bit about this, and it's very difficult sometimes to come up with where we stand right now. We're looking right now at these huge increases. I don't know if you've noticed or driven by the gas station 5 minutes ago, but it's very expensive. My diesel fuel for my truck just went up to $5.19 a gallon. So it's very expensive. But we also have expenses at the city. And so we're running into more and more concerns about where we stand. And it's not that the city's having any financial difficulty by any means, but we don't want to have to cut back on some of the minor things that we're trying to progress through. One of the things has been that we've slowed the growth down. This council has slowed the growth down a little bit to try and catch up on infrastructure. We were just growing out of control, and we've been able to control that a little bit better, only by trying to tighten up things a little bit and make sure we have infrastructure to maintain the traffic and things that are going on within the city. Where you've seen a lot of road projects, and millions of dollars have been brought in through grants to try and work on those roads to get people in and out of the city. If you notice real quick, we're a pass-through city. We have cities below us, and they have to drive through our town. And that puts a lot more stress as they grow and we grow and other people grow. Everybody's using more and more of our roads and our areas. So every year we review this. We look at the energy tax. We look at the property tax. We've been able for over 35 years been able to hold off a property tax. But comes a time when you have to honestly look at it and see where we stand with it, especially if it comes to safety issues within the city. So I think as our sales tax is going to increase, as we see things like our Walmart coming in, we will see a lot more. I love the fact that whether you're a fan or not of Walmart, I think it's very important to know that, they're not invasive into the city. They're on the border. They're up by Roy. So some people think that Walmart's going into Roy. I'm fine with that. We collect the data and the information and the funding on that. So I think there's a lot of things for us to consider as we look forward to how we're going to finance some of these things. So I think it's important we go through a few of these items, and whether we do it in more detail later. But yeah, I think it'd be fine to go ahead and move forward with at least maybe another half hour. We could talk up to a half hour.
Okay, that'd be great.
And Councilmember calls so that you could go as long as you wanted. She'll order pizza. We have.
Okay. Well, I do appreciate your time. I want to talk a little bit about Walmart, because Walmart has the potential to increase our sales tax, and they certainly will. But there also are going to be some expenses associated with Walmart, and primarily those are going to be calls for service. And it's hard to know exactly what the impacts will be, but 10 years ago, KSL looked at Walmart and the amount of calls generated by various Walmarts, and they varied.
Excuse me, Emily?
Yeah.
Could you move that out of the way on there on the screen? Is it on your screen?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry.
Minimize that.
Yeah, let me see if I can do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me see if I can move it further.
There you go.
Thank you for. So you can see, in Salt Lake, 1,500 calls, nearing 1,600, and that was again in 2016. In Ogden, there's been 1,000 calls, but there's also been some where there's just been a couple hundred calls. Most of these calls, I would anticipate, or at least the news report seemed to attribute to calls associated with shoplifting. And frankly, The former city that I worked with had a hospital, and they actually generated quite a few calls as well. And it was really related to individuals going through mental health crises. And, part of the conversation that we were having with the hospital was essentially helping to pay the cost for providing that kind of service. And they pushed back a little bit on it. And they said something that made a lot of sense, which was, these are society issues. They're not necessarily, we're essentially realizing and sort of a service provider for issues that are more associated with society, not necessarily us individually. And I feel like in some ways that's Walmart as well. They all provide service. Walmart provides a service that all of us need, or someone in that industry who is selling groceries and other goods. And so it's not necessarily, their fault that a certain portion of society, will come and shoplift from them. And so, unfortunate as that is, there are calls that come, and it's calls that come with commercial in general. So, and the reason why that's all relevant and significant is because, I mentioned to you, I anticipate that our cost for policing services could increase based upon these calls for services. There's also those calls and the citations, that may come from it will also increase our court cost as well. And so that's something, and I'll talk to you about that here briefly. So anyways, here's what I anticipate. I just did 1,000 calls, not knowing if that was going to be a high number. It's certainly on the higher side. But if that is the case, adjusting for an additional 1,000 calls of service is 700. Essentially, it's a change of $80,000 attributed to those 1,000 calls, at least in this current funding formula that we have. For adjusting our population by 1,100 people, and I'll talk about that number because it does have some significance. Those two elements combined would essentially increase charge for services to 123,000. So I was just trying to forecast what those impacts could be in the future as Walmart, gets up and operating, and as businesses occur and develop around Walmart. So here's the funding formula, and that's just the breakout a little bit more specifically. So I talked to you about court cases. Even without Walmart, we've seen, increases of nearly 17% from year to year with our court. And there's two costs associated with court. We do have an interlocal agreement with Roy again to have them facilitate our justice court, but there are direct expenses. Essentially, how that arrangement works is there's fees and fines and forfeitures that come associated with the prosecution and conviction of or essentially the payment of fines, and the state takes a portion of that. I think it's I'm going to say it's nearly 50%. It differs based on the severity of the case and what the citation was and the fine paid, but it's somewhere between 50 to 60%. So the state takes their portion. Roy takes half of what's remaining for the facility of facilitation of justice court, and then we get the remaining half. I would tell you that, and not that this is just by happenstance. It's not something that we try to control or try to make happen. It just so happens that essentially the fines that we take in essentially pays for the expense of the justice court, and that's for the prosecution and public defense. So for indigent individuals, the city pays for some public defense, and that's associated with the Constitution and individuals' rights. And so, but I would tell you this, that they're also, if they're convicted of the crime, are found guilty or plead guilty, the judge will often order that they pay a portion of their public defense back over time as part of their restitution. So anyways, that's something just to be aware of is the increase that will likely occur and potential costs increases in justice court. So I want to talk to you about sales tax. And as you know, right now, the general fund is about $10 million of expense. We get about $6 million in sales tax. So 60% of our revenue is really based and locked on sales tax. And some of those other, we have some growth-related revenue related to building permits and the cost to regulate building within the city. But this by large is how the city funds its general governmental services. And for years, you can see that it has grown year after year by great percentages. And so this is the first year that I'm actually projecting. So this current fiscal year, 2026, I'm projecting actually a 2% decrease. And that's in part tied to some population decreases that we've seen within the city. And I don't think these are physical decreases, but these are essentially, let me just roll to the next slide because I think I'll jump to the slide. So essentially, the state legislature last year adopted some legislation that went into effect that created the Utah Population Committee. So they essentially moved away from the current, what was the longstanding data set of the U.S. Census that was estimating population growth to create a city or a state committee that would estimate population. So you can see here in June 2025, we had a population of 24,617. A month later, based upon the change in the data sets, we dropped to 22,310 by virtue of the estimate of the Utah Population Committee. So, the mayor was very much on top of this issue. He's the one who brought it to my attention. And we've had some conversations with Utah Population Committee who have been, really great to work with. In some ways, they're limited on what they can do based upon the legislation and some of the requirements in state code. But essentially, we found 1,100 people that we felt like we could verify were errors within the data set. And my understanding of the conversation is that with this next estimate, which will be essentially going into effect in July, that it'll adjust those numbers to 1,100. We'll still be short from the 24,000 that the U.S. Census estimated, and we hope to make that up over time. I did note that there were about 214 building permits issued in 2025, and this isn't perfect numbers because there is quite a bit of complexity that goes into these estimates that they use because they have lag times based upon new building permits issued. But using the census numbers of the average household size for West Haven, that's essentially three individuals per household, that would get us up to about 659. So I essentially felt like it's possible roughly to anticipate that we could expect close to the same population in 2027 that we had in 2025. But there's a little bit of hope, in that. I'm also thinking that inflation could make up the gap between, the population number, because we'll still be under the population by about, 500 or so. I'm hoping that helps to fill the gap again. So I didn't really explain this for those who are in the audience, but sales tax is based upon a funding formula that includes population, essentially. And that's why that's important.
Hey, Sean.
Yeah.
I think just to add to that real quick too, when we lose population due to some error, and it was some error on not the city's part, but on this change, We also lost, funding for Class B roads.
Mhm.
And so population for us is super important to maintain, not to just grow all the time, or we're not, advocating that we continue to grow, but we want to maintain it. We don't want to lose it. It cost us, we estimated around just under $200,000 in losses from, collections from that. So the city didn't get that. That's what caught my attention.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important for us to at least watch these things. And I appreciate you keeping up with that as well and giving your estimates to move forward.
Yeah, thank you. So again, as an estimate goes, I felt like maybe using the actuals that we received in 2025, based again upon maybe increasing our population, some of the inflation that I mentioned earlier could get us back to about $6.1 million. I do anticipate at this point that Walmart could be open for 3 months out of the new fiscal year, and that's in coordination or in trying to understand their construction schedule. That's in part what they led me to believe. Some of it I had to estimate because they didn't give me an exact time frame, but they felt like the building itself, the outer shell, would be done by the end of this calendar year. And they also mentioned at that point that they would need to build the interior out or do some kind of interior improvements, and that they would obviously need to stock and load the freight and make it essentially a retail outlet. And so I anticipate that we would essentially have 3 months, at least for this budget. I felt like that was a reasonable assumption. And so Walmart has the ability to generate $100 million in sales to $150 million in sales. And so based on that, we estimate that we could essentially, in fact, I'll show you the estimate here. This was a study that was put together that looked at what we felt like the sales tax could be. There's a 1% local sales tax option. We're suggesting that maybe 90% might be a reasonable. 90% of that 1% would come back to the city. And again, because 50% is based upon the point of sale, and then the other, portion of sales tax distributed by the state back to the cities is based upon our population. So you look at the first year, we estimated 900,000, and you could see it going all the way up. That second line below is a public infrastructure reimbursement arrangement that we have. So as you know, Walmart was contemplated for many years to be developed there. In that process, they platted a subdivision, constructed a public road, which is called Hunter Drive. And as you know, that road fell into disrepair because essentially there was no use in it. It was blocked off. And so that road needed to be rehabilitated. And frankly, roads that aren't used, deteriorate. And unfortunately, that's occurred there. And honestly, Walmart over that course of that period of time, the layout and the size of their stores had changed and didn't really accommodate Walmart store that would maximize that site. And so anyways, as you know, the road was realigned, readjusted, and there will be a reimbursement for that public road and the rehabilitation and realignment of it. And you can see that shown in the red. And so essentially half of the sales tax that's generated from Walmart would be returned until that road was paid, at least a portion of it. I think it's $2 million. I think the road itself was close to $4 million, including some street traffic lights that will be installed. So anyway, so what that means here is this.
Just
Yeah.
ask a question.
Mhm.
So when will year one be? Do we know what budget year that will come due for us?
Good question. So I anticipate, I felt like it would, Walmart would be open the fourth quarter of fiscal year 2027. So that would be, what would that be? June, May, April?
Right.
April to June. And so the way the agreement's written is that we would track the sales that were generated from Walmart for a year period of time and then reimburse them at the end of the year. So
So it might not be a fiscal year at all. Is that kind of?
No, right, yeah, so but we would probably, there is a budgeted expense, so we would budget the expense as well. So essentially, we would reserve those funds for that
Right.
future obligation. So, so I think at least this first year, it's $75,000 a month from Walmart, 37,500 would go to the city, and 37,500 for the construction of that road. So that's what nets out to be this 6.2, $250,000 that I anticipate would be available from sales tax.
Yeah, just
So-
if I may, to the first initial, when we had our groundbreaking, they had an aggressive schedule to try and be done by August of this year. And that's disappointing because they've cut back. They've cut back on, they were supposed to work night and day because of the location. It wasn't to be, they were going to light it up and work, and the weather was very cooperative, but they've had some delays. So now we're seeing this later delay, which will put us back a little bit farther, but it's probably still a normal build and a normal timeline, but they were trying to be aggressive, and it just isn't going to happen as fast as we anticipated.
Yeah, thank you. So, again, there's the potential to generate more sales tax, but it doesn't equal, those ongoing expenses that I mentioned earlier of that $1 million. So, let me just move forward here. I would say that periodically and fairly consistently, we've had some really good years. As I mentioned, sales tax has been strong in some years. Through the COVID era, there was some federal funding that the city realized, and we've had some growth-related revenues, and all those equaled years when the city was able to essentially move money from the general fund at the end of the year to our capital projects fund. And that's an important component because otherwise there's not really any funding source for capital projects or capital equipment. And so I did want to note and recognize that we've had some great years and we've been able to move money into this capital project fund. And we'll talk about capital projects probably at the next meeting. But you can see these were our treasurer's analysis of why we were able to, at the end of any fiscal year, sort of what a snapshot in time, what that looked like, and how we were able to move money over to our capital projects fund. Really what it comes down to is there's a 35% cap of revenues that can be retained in general fund for purposes of cash flow. Anything above that, the state does not allow us to retain in the general fund. And again, that's why we move it to the capital projects fund. But essentially, in some years, we've had revenues that were higher than anticipated. And because the budget itself sets a statutory cap on expenses, we always come in under. And in some cases, I really credit the city staff. I mean, and the culture here. I think there's frugality amongst city staff. That was my observation when I arrived. And I think there's also this culture that the council will appropriate additional funds so it doesn't put pressure unduly on city staff to purchase, anticipating that the appropriation is going to lapse. And when you start to do that, you start to make bad procurement decisions, in my opinion. And so I think all those things kind of help to create this ability to have expenditures less than budgeted. So I would also tell you that, and this has changed. I just looked at this code section the other day, but it looks like it was changed in 2025. But the state legislature, they're the ones who enable cities to do what we do and give us enabling language. They have created sales tax as a revenue source. They talked about the purpose and intent of sales tax, and again, that's changed slightly. But I do feel like this was originally why the city or the state legislature allowed us to implement this 1% option sales tax. And it was, if you look under the underlying section of the code, it was really an added revenue source to the greatest extent possible to counties, cities, and towns to finance capital outlay, what we just talked about, capital equipment and purchases, and to service their bonded indebtedness. So again, to bond for capital projects. A lot of cities, and maybe this is why the code has changed, a lot of cities, and there wasn't a restriction necessarily. We didn't necessarily have to use it for that sole purpose, even though that was their declared legislative intent. But to a great extent, cities do use it for general governmental purposes. And so, but I do think we do need to be cognizant of that need for capital equipment purchases. So property tax, you know, I told you there's a gap between what our sales tax is going to do, at least in the short term. We hope that economic development and we hope to see sales tax increase over time. But in 2023, this was some information that I got when I first arrived here, and it was from the property tax division with the state. Jared, he essentially identified out of the 255 cities, the 5 cities that did not charge property tax in 2023. And of course, West Haven was one of those. You can see Marriott Slaterville, our neighbor, was another one. Some of these other cities, you know, have different elements to them. And I just say that, for example, Moab City is a resort city. They have the ability and advantage for additional sales tax because they're designated as a resort community, and it's a provision in the state code that allows for that. They also have some TRT taxes, and we do too, but to a greater extent, you know, they realize that's transient room tax. So there's, you know, like a 9%, 10% sales tax charged for a room. And a part of that is returned to cities and the county. That's the TRT. So I won't spend any time here other than these are just the taxable property values, which I found fairly interesting. I would just say, you know, West Haven City is at 2.6 billion. If I understand how to say these numbers, I think that's 2.6 billion. 9.2 for Ogden. You can see Roy and North Ogden. But so if we just looking again, this is Jared. We just looked at some different tax rates, and frankly, tax rates will adjust to essentially generate the same amount of revenue that it did last year for the city plus the new growth. And so tax rates are a little, I mean, they're important in the equation. They essentially, but they adjust to essentially to deliver revenue. But the city's capped at essentially the same amount of revenue that it had last year. So it doesn't adjust for inflation. I know that might be confusing to hear, and we can certainly dive into it, but I want to keep it simple, and I'll just leave it at that. But you can see just different opportunities at the highest extent allowed by law. We could generate $18 million at the lowest rate. We could generate $2,000. And that's really what's interesting about property tax is it's revenue driven. So the city could essentially say, we need $1 million, and it's the only revenue source that you could essentially program the amount of revenue you need in order to be able to realize it to a large extent. And so that's one of the unique elements of property tax, but there's also some confusion and frankly, you know, there's some resistance to property tax and for different reasons. I'll provide this slide deck to you. I'm not going to go into some of these thoughts about property tax, but they're there for you to review, and we can certainly talk about it. But for the sake of time, I'll leave it at that. So also I would tell you that there's an auto fee in lieu that would also coincide with property tax. And, you know, essentially property tax is taxed on real property. It's taxed on centrally assessed property. Centrally assessed property, you can see we have about 36 million. Those are going to be railroads. Those are going to be power lines. They're essentially improvements that span beyond the city boundary, and the state evaluates and assesses the value of those property. They're often, frankly, contested by some of these large corporations, the railroad, the power company, to drive their taxes down. But nonetheless, that's what's centrally assessed in personal property. So part of that personal property includes vehicles, and they're taxed at the rate. It's really, frankly, confusing. I spent some time talking to the county assessor and the county auditor and the staff there. They grapple with telling me exactly, but essentially, so I don't really have a good estimate of what that would generate per se. But I just wanted to make you aware that would be something that you would see in addition to, if you instituted property tax, something else that you would see. So, again, just for the sake of time, I'll provide this to you. This is information you've already seen, but as part of our residential survey for those in the audience, there was, the city asked our residents about property tax and the reason to increase property tax, and gave different options, and you see different results. For public safety, I was a little surprised because I would say my experience has been generally that that residents have been more understanding about the fact that they feel as though law enforcement is an essential service, and because of that they're more apt to understand the need for property tax to provide for that essential service. But in our case, with our residents, it was kind of split equally. 41% property tax to support law enforcement, 41% supported, and 40% opposed. And I'll leave it at that. But I would just generally tell you that residents recognize that Weber County was doing a great job for us, and I feel the same. As far as the level of service, especially compared to the cost, I feel like there is good value for the city there, and I think the residents felt the same. So I'll just move along here. But I did want to talk about the energy tax because that's another option. One thing that we didn't talk about property tax is there's quite a process to enact it. And even still, that topic itself was discussed and debated, and laws were introduced in this last legislative session. There were some changes that were made to property tax and how you enact it. The energy tax is a little different. Essentially, again, the state enables cities to essentially adopt an ordinance that implements an energy tax. And interesting enough, West Haven City on May 20th, 1998 did adopt an ordinance to enact it. It's 6%, although administratively, legislatively, it was enacted by you as a city, well, not you, but by a city council at the time in 1998 as an ordinance, because that's how you adopt these energy taxes. But administratively, it was never implemented. It was never passed along, as I can understand, to the tax commission, who would actually notify those utility companies to start withholding and remitting the energy, or not withholding, but to assess and then remit to the city. So
Does that require a truth in taxation hearing?
No, and again, it's been a while since I've implemented energy tax, but my recollection was I wasn't even sure that there was a public hearing required. But I think by virtue of the way that you conduct business, whenever you adopt an ordinance, you do a public hearing. And certainly, I think it would be appropriate to do a public hearing in this case, since it's been so long since it was adopted, just to get the public's input and to have a dialogue and conversation. But it's feasible that we could potentially submit that ordinance from 1998 and essentially start collecting the energy tax. And what that would yield would be estimated, this is from 2022, it looks like, to 2023, they looked at essentially the taxable sales in West Haven, and they felt like it would generate $678,000 from Rocky Mountain Power. And for, I think it's not Dominion, it's Enbridge. Does that sound right? Enbridge, at least when Dominion was, it was at essentially 530,000. So overall, it can generate about $1.2 million in ongoing revenue. And I would say that I do think that there is, and I think, frankly, I think there's good reason for the public to be confused and about property tax. Energy tax is a little bit more straightforward, and again, I won't dive into that unless you really want to. But I have these notes here. In some cases, I think, one of the reasons why it might make sense to adopt a property tax to pay for some of these expenses, I will say this, is I feel like I mentioned it already, general acceptance potentially for central government services like policing to have property tax help pay in. I feel like there is a nexus between protection of property, law enforcement, property crimes, and property taxes. But there is a lot of confusion about how it's implemented and administered, and we won't dive too deep into there. I think some of the arguments or thoughts around an energy tax, why it might make sense, is that generally the city's always funded governmental services through a sales tax, and this is a form of sales tax. I think there's a nexus to be made that sales tax right now is a little unstable, and we need to shore it up. And again, we can bolster it with another form of sales tax. And so those might be some good reasons to think of using or implementing. I should say just administratively implementing the ordinance that was adopted in 1998 and then start to implement the collection of the energy tax. So I think that is a good breaking point. Although I will say, actually, if I could, Mayor, could I take just 5 more minutes and just also tell you, as you start to think about funding sources and what that might mean for the public, you should know that we've been working on a storm drain fee. It's a utility. It's its own fund, and essentially it's a business activity. And what I mean by that is what we've been talking about previous are called what are called non-exchange revenues, where essentially any tax, there's not necessarily a direct connection but with the tax that you paid and the services that you provide. With utility or businesses, the fees that you pay should really equal the services that you receive. And so those are called exchange revenues. And so again, the storm drain will be based upon what are the services we're providing and what is the cost to provide that service specifically. And so it's been a little bit of an effort to come up with a methodology that's proportionate and fair. We're in the final stages, at least I hope so. We're looking essentially, it's required us to look at and create averages of impervious surfaces for different residential development and to do a site-by-site analysis of commercial development. And then there's questions that come from those things that vary slightly. So anyways, we're working through it. All that's to say is right now, our operating revenue from storm drain utility fees is $300,000. Our operating expenses is essentially approaching $9 million. So there's a deficit of about $630,000. That does not include some administrative fees, which I won't dive too far into that. That's this administrative breakdown. But by comparison, you can see that, and I actually haven't updated, thank Michelle for that. She looked at some of these other cities that I think are surrounding us and fairly comparable. And this is not that slide. I think I have some new data that I need to chart, but you can see that they range, well, the very far bar chart shows you that the average for stormwater fee in 2024 was essentially $7.25, and it's nearing in 2026 at nearly $8. So we would essentially need to, to make up that difference, to essentially 2 to 3 times what we're currently paying, which would increase anywhere from $72 to $108 annually for, on average. And it's not as simple as that, because as I mentioned, the methodology differs based upon the amount of impervious surface. But to give you some understanding of what also is I think going to be before you in the near future as you factor in, how do we pay for services? So with that said, I'll stop there, and I would welcome any thoughts, opinions, concerns, questions, because we will need to, this budget is a little different in the sense that for the most part, well, the 2 years that the two other budgets that I've been involved in, we were able to essentially make the expenses and the revenues equal, such that we didn't really need to look for alternative revenue sources. This year is obviously different than that. So there will need to be some decisions and some input, direction given to you or given to me from you.
Okay, thank you. Man, you give him 2 minutes.
And then
Very good. Thanks for
Okay.
going over that. I hope that was helpful. I know it's a little bit long, but hopefully it was helpful to just review. And those are things that we talk about every year and try and make sure that we do the best we can and by working with the city's money.
Ron, can you remind us when the deadlines are to do the city budget?
Yes, thank you for that. So, so the first meeting in May, we need to adopt a tentative budget. And then the final budget will be the second meeting in June. I do need to look, I mentioned to you that property tax, that there were some changes in the state legislature. They did include it, they made it more complicated, and frankly, I thought it was complicated enough to go through the public process, but there's some additional requirements that have deadlines that I would need to look at too, and so that's something to keep in mind. You know, so I didn't dig those out at this point.
Did you have a question?
Just going back to the energy tax, what, do we have any idea what that looks like to the residents, how that affects? I mean, it obviously depends on how much you use, right? So, because it
Mhm.
works more like a sales tax, but just
Yeah, some of the
For-
thoughts I think that I would tell you is one, it's a little bit more seamless. I mean, it's essentially like property tax. It's another entity collecting for us, and I appreciate the county. Even though we don't have property tax, there's other public entities that benefit from property tax, and they take the lion's share. Well, they do facilitate that in conjunction with the tax commission. In this case, it would be the utility provider. I think one of the hard parts about property tax is that it's a lump sum at the end of the year, and it really is obvious and painful to write a check, especially if you own your property outright. This is a little different in the sense that it would appear on your utility bill, and it would be collected incrementally, and so it doesn't have the same shock value and the same potentially difficulties with coming up with a larger sum of money.
So
At the end of the year.
basically, it's a user tax that would go to every resident of West Haven, depending on how much usage they had. Whereas a property tax would be for property owners only. Is that a good way?
Yeah, that's right. I could ask.
yeah, just, I mean, rough, I know it's,
I would have to work with the utility companies to see if they could help, provide what the average bill is for a resident, and then we could figure that out. You could also maybe look at your utility bill itself and then, multiply it by 6% and also take a look that way, which might be a little easier
yeah.
to put in relative terms.
I think most cities, I would say most cities across Weber County, especially in the state, have this tax. So it's something West Haven has not implemented at this point. I think I've heard a lot, it's about $6, $6 or $7, depending
Okay.
on what year.
Yeah.
So it's not a lot, but it still adds up, obviously, but. Any other questions from the council? Okay, if not, thank you. Thank you
Okay.
for that. And that's a lot of explanation and you did a great job.
I
Thank you.
appreciate that.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to our next item on here. We don't really have I don't think we need to do an action on that at this point. We'll have some more discussion about it, I think, in other meetings, if that's okay. So we'll move on to item 13. And I don't know if we had anything you wanted to continue from our earlier meeting. Any other discussion points from item 13 on there? If not, we'll go ahead and pass on that one and move to item 14 for adjournment. I need a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?